Sadly, our old broken tree had to go. We still feel bad about it, but it became all the more clear to us that we had made the right decision to cut it down when a terrifying menace tore through the Midwestern United States. Derecho. The vast majority of us were unfamiliar with the term until it knocked out our power and communications for days, even weeks, for many Iowans. Hurricane-like winds ripped entire trees from the ground and left irreparable damage everywhere. I would not wish one of these storms on anyone. The visible destruction is a constant reminder, and we won't soon forget it. I already had plans for the wood from our maple tree that we took down, and now with all this debris, I can add more wood to that pile. While thousands of other Iowans are dragging their tree branches out to the street for pickup, I'm taking them the other direction, to the backyard, to bury them in the ground along with our old tree. Yes, I know I may look a bit crazy, but in this case I'm experimenting with something called Hugelkultur, or for us Americans, Hugelkultur, which you may have heard about already. It's a centuries-old German method of burying wood and organic matter underneath the soil to form a raised garden bed that's supposedly drought-resistant, self-fertilizing, and definitely space-saving. It sounded so intriguing and useful that I had to try it for myself. It would also be the perfect way to repurpose a lot of this wood, aside from just chopping it up for firewood and eventually burning it down to ash and charcoal to add to the garden soil. Of course, it's very important to call your local utility services before you start digging to make sure there aren't any utility lines buried underground. I know already that all of ours are located on the other side of the property, so there will be no problems digging here. Here's how Hugelkultur is supposed to work. The basic ingredients are wood logs, small branches, green matter, brown matter, compost, and soil. The smaller, greener material breaks down quickly and provides nutrients in the beginning, while the thick logs and other brown material break down slowly and fertilize the soil over a longer period. Decaying wood also soaks up a lot more water than soil alone, so the beds shouldn't require as much water as a traditional garden bed. There are several common Hugelkultur construction methods. Number 1, get some heavy equipment and dig a deep trench, add lots of wood and organic matter, and mound the soil over it to a height of about 6 feet. Number 2, dig a shallow bed, fill it with layers of material, and return the soil on top. Number 3, instead of digging, just lay down sheet mulch and pile up the ingredients. This method requires purchasing or otherwise acquiring soil from elsewhere. Or number 4, build a tall raised garden bed out of wood or other acceptable material and fill it using the same layering process. We're using method number 2 since we can use our own soil, we won't have to build wooden bed frames, and therefore it won't cost us anything.
Some typical gardening advice also applies to Hugelkultur beds. So let's see.
Do not use any wood that releases allelopathic chemicals such as black walnut, which can inhibit plant growth.
Yep, we used all maple wood for these. That's a good one to use, so we're good there.
Build raised beds in the fall so they have time to mature before planting in the spring.
Yep, it's the middle of September. These are all set up, resting for a bit, and they'll be ready for next year.
While researching for this project, I also found some advice that was more specific to Hugelkultur. First of all, you should be careful not to overload a Hugelkultur bed with an abundance of nutrient-rich material that could leach out excess nutrients and contaminate the surrounding soil and/or a nearby water habitat. And secondly, since the beds will naturally settle over a few years, they may not be suitable for planting perennials like fruit trees or shrubs. So I've been careful to use mostly brown material that will release nutrients slowly, with a small amount of green matter and compost to introduce good bacteria for decomposition. And we won't be planting any perennials into these beds, just our annual kitchen veggies that won't be around long enough to notice the bed settling. Since we still have a bit more wood left over, we're incorporating a lot of that into the garden landscape as insect and wildlife habitats, as pathway borders, and as a slow-release fertilizer. Leaving the wood on the soil surface is a natural way to provide a myriad of benefits to the garden ecosystem. So by now you've already seen a bit of what I'm doing here, but let's go over it in more detail. I first measured out and marked the corners for 3 8-foot by 4-foot beds. I started by removing the vegetation from the topsoil and setting that aside on a tarp. Here you can see me using this awesome tool that my brother made for me in his blacksmith shop. This thing has the perfect angle and weight for chopping out weeds. It's got a mesquite wood handle, and it even has my initials on it. Aww. After that, I continued with the rest of the soil. In an attempt to make this process slightly more efficient, I placed the soil from the first bed on a tarp and set that close to where the third bed would be located. Then the soil from the next bed could go onto the previous one, and so on until the last bed would use the soil from the first. During this process, it was unavoidable that I had to evict quite a few friends from their homes, but at least I was able to give some of them a new place to live. I dug down to 1 shovel depth. There were still plenty of big roots from the old maple tree to chop out, and many of these will wind up back in the hole anyway, but it's much easier to arrange the hugel bed material with these roots out of the way. And there we are, nice and tidy. Next, logs. Big, hefty, beefy maple tree logs, lined up straight down the middle with a little gap in between them. I filled in the rest of the hole by cutting skinnier branches to size and plugging smaller gaps with those root cuttings. At this point, I was able to start digging out the soil from the next bed and dumping that into the first one. Some gardeners have had issues with termites or burrowing rodents in their hugel beds, so it's important to make sure all the gaps between the larger wood pieces get filled in completely. This can also prevent uneven settling or even sinkholes. Transferring the soil this way from one bed to the other also buries the topsoil, along with most weed seeds, underneath the subsoil. We'll be covering these beds with mulch in the end, but at least this may also prevent them from getting excessively weedy. So next I added a layer of wood chips from our mulch pile, which also contains some slightly green material from other yard waste. Then a bit more soil, and some chopped up branches and dead leaves from the old tree. A layer of coarse compost followed that, and finally, lots and lots of digging and piling soil. And now you can just watch me burn a few thousand calories as I continue building the other 2 beds. I figured it couldn't hurt to throw a cover crop on the beds while we still have some warmer weather. Once this dies off in the winter, I'll just add a layer of wood chips over everything. Having completed this project now, I will say that it is a great deal of physical work. I hope it will be worth it, but theoretically, the Hugelkultur method should reduce the amount of work required from here on out. From what I've read, a Hugelkultur bed may only last 5 to 6 years before the material is completely broken down and the bed needs to be rebuilt. I will continue to share the progress from these beds over the next few years, so please be sure to come back to learn more about it. Many permaculture gardeners and farmers from around the world have been amazed by the results using Hugelkultur, so here's hoping I can add my own testimonial to the pile. Or rather, to the Hugel. Yep, I'll see myself out. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Happy gardening.